Bert said it perfect. These small truckers, they're worried about trucking, right? They're worried about their fuel bill and when they're going to get paid and what's happening at home. They're not worried about compliance. And as much as a 3PL or an insurance might be like, hey, you should think about this, it's tough for them to do that. So trucking is difficult. It's an essential industry that every corner of the nation depends on, even without knowing it. To the average consumer, the supply chain is magic, and sometimes a black hole. Products on store shelves, dinner on restaurant tables, packages on doorsteps. It's expected to be there on time, every time, and only recognized if there's a service failure. But how is a sausage made? Who's talking about the issues that matter to trucking companies?
Welcome to True North Truck Thought, or the TTT Pod for short. A monthly podcast hosted by Insurability Transportation Consulting and brought to you by True North Companies. We're here to demystify the magic, address the black holes, and to talk trucking to the industry we love. Whether it's the latest research, upcoming laws and rules, safety issues and solutions, or practical discussions about real-life supply chain challenges, the TTT Pod is here to help the most important industry in our country to navigate its greatest challenges and opportunities. We bring together some of the best and brightest experts to talk about and tackle some of the most pressing industry issues. So without further ado, I'm Steve Kepler.
And I'm Sean Garney. Let's get trucking. One of the things we do a lot at Insurability Consulting is to think about compliance. We're constantly talking clients through tricky compliance conundrums and helping to set up operations to unlock efficiencies and see through compliance to safety. Our faithful listeners might remember our very first podcast, during which we unpacked the compliance versus safety paradigm. I think it's fair to characterize our conclusions as pointing out that compliance does not equal safety, but we'd be remiss if we didn't say compliance is a great place to start. So that's where we'll start today. Joining us is Tim Henry. He's CEO of Haul, an AI-powered platform that helps carriers monitor compliance, safety, and risk across drivers, vehicles, and equipment. He's here to share some of his experiences working with fleets to monitor and mitigate risk. We're also pleased to welcome several members of the True North team. With us today are a few familiar faces, Bert Mayo, Peter Berg, and Bill Zink. Welcome all.
Good morning.
Hey, Sean. Good morning. Welcome to the TTT podcast version of Hollywood Squares. I think we'll start with the middle square, which I think is Tim from Haul. Tim, tell us a little bit about how you came to solving compliance as an important goal of your career.
Yeah, thanks, Sean, and thanks everyone for inviting me today. The how I got here is pretty simple. Before Haul, I found myself running a CDL driver staffing outfit, and quite frankly, when you have thousands of drivers on the road at any given time, jumping in the trucks of some of the largest brands we know in trucking, the first thing that comes to mind, are these drivers compliant? So I lived the existential question of, are my drivers regulatory ready to be in these trucks? And what happens if they're not? So I lived that problem, and after kind of feeling that angst every day, we built tech to monitor our drivers, and through that we saw that we built really robust software that could allow other fleets to really pacify this anxiousness that I felt around if their drivers are compliant. So I felt the problem, and I think any good product is one that you feel, and that's why we are really focused on building software to solve this.
So interesting question. I think that's obviously you start at the ground level, right, Tim? And maybe even backing up a little bit, and this I think just for you as well as the True North folks. So, obviously you're all dealing with lots of fleets. So what do you see as some of the biggest challenges that fleets experience today in dealing with their compliance responsibilities?
Yeah, and just to point on that, what are those things that gave you angst? What are the things that give other people angst? I think trucking, just the risk that we see out in the space, it's just a nervous space. So what are those things? What are those challenges? What gives you angst?
Yeah, I think during that time, what really gave me pause every day was just the fact that humans make errors, right? There's not enough coffee for me not to make an error in a day. It's just a reality. We're humans. We make mistakes, but the real thing around regulatory compliance, you can't make a mistake. It is binary. You have to follow set instructions. So for me, it was all about just human error. Like accidents do happen, right? So, but making sure that if an accident happened, we follow the right process post accident, but also we did everything we best to make sure that driver was road ready. And so making sure that we had pretty standard operating procedures embedded by software to make sure that driver was ready. So even just a simple example of, did that license match what was on the medical card? The classic gotcha auditing a driver qualification file. But a lot of times people just fat finger these things and they just overlook something. So those little things, just even at the driver level, when we're looking at documents all day, every day, that making sure we didn't make a mistake. So those were kind of the little things that do add up to a major issue and liability if there was an accident to occur. So that's kind of, for me, what I felt and why we thought software was a really great way for us to really provide a solution.
It's interesting, just you mentioned about driver being road ready. If you look at the data from last year on all the compliance investigations that were done around the country, the number one acute violation discovered was allowing drivers to drive with a suspended or revoked CDL. 36% of the acute violations. So to your point, even with humans, people are making mistakes, and technology certainly can help in dealing with that.
Yeah, that's a good call.
But to your point, that stat's hardly even a fat finger problem.
That's right.
There's probably some of that in that space, but that seems like a sort of a larger challenge, and I think, software can certainly help that, but then, communicating with our driver and making sure that makes sense. True North team, what's the risk of the fat finger? What if I do that? Like, what do you guys suppose would be one of those sort of bad outcomes or some of the things we should avoid in the compliance picture?
Yeah, I mean, Bert, you and I can riff on this one a little bit, but fundamentally, Sean, as you know, True North is about helping clients really globally with their enterprise risk, framework in terms of how they manage risk, and really helping them become a better insured in many ways. And so, the risk solutions team partners with our insurance practice to kind of tackle the issue from both sides as a means to help build a better insured. And ultimately, what we're trying to do is, support companies in driving down their total cost of risk. And so we think about it in terms of my ability to, get insurance first and foremost, or get quality insurance at a reasonable price that fits within my P&L, starts foundationally with how do I manage compliance? To have a viable business, I've got to be able to hit some minimum guidelines of compliance and be able to get insurance. And that at least gives me the walk into, be on the road hauling freight. So, Bert can talk a little bit more about what we're seeing from a, litigation standpoint that's been problematic of not managing compliance appropriately. That's led to, nuclear verdicts or just higher cost claims than maybe otherwise need to be. But I think about technology, just kind of going down that thread we were just on. We believe, a optimized technology platform around compliance is augmenting people and automating some of the things that, we would say are the $10 an hour labor work in a technology workflow, so that, Sean, to your point, it's really tough to automate the communication requirements between a dispatcher and a driver. and notifying them that they may need to get, a new CDL uploaded or a med card or something like that. Like that's the work that technology, struggles to automate, is contextualizing the need to complete the profile in the platform, right? So if you can gain efficiencies in the technology workflows to automate more of the tactical work, now you can engage the humans in the harder effort stuff, right? That's what's important to us. Because back to kind of our core tenets, we've never walked into a trucking company, large or small, where an executive team has said, I'm overstaffed in my risk, safety, compliance, HR department.
That's never happened?
Right? I mean, never happened. And you get a lot of head nodding, particularly when those folks are in the room saying, like, I'm drowning here. And so why does that happen? Well, because there's a lot of disparate systems trying to manage a global compliance profile. So if you can bring more integration and augmentation of the human work that's required into the equation, that's where we get excited about large and small companies being able to, pair technology up with humans in that compliance domain, so that then we, as the insurance guys, can go in and present just a better quality risk to underwriters because they're doing it more effectively. So that's what matters to us in terms of the strategy and why compliance is so rooted in like best in class motor carriers. Now, Bert, when that's not done properly, you can talk a little bit about some of the exposures that ultimately occur on the risk insurance side.
Well, I mean, the underwriters use, so if you look at, and I'll use the typical public benchmark out there is, CSA. So underwriters use your CSA basics as kind of the initial, threshold, I guess, if you will. And if you get more than one basic, if you have a basic and alert, there's a red flag raised, right? You get more than one, then they get very concerned. And there's some of their reinsurance markets that have treaties with our insurers that won't even allow them to touch them if they have 3 or more basics in alert. And Steve, you mentioned the reason that is just what Bill's alluding to is you wind up in court with basics and alert. It's an easy story for a plaintiff to tell the jury, right? And so we wind up settling, and as we all know, settlements are typically higher than the wind up in court, although you wind up with that nuclear verdict. So we settle to get out of it. But, Steve, you alluded to the driver. I can't remember what it was no CDL or improper license or
suspended or revoked.
Yeah, suspended or revoked. And I'd like to ask both of y'all, but I'm willing to bet most of that winds up in the fitness category. It's all due to a med card or something like that, right?
Yes. The other place we see it a lot is like, and I think we're going to get here, but we see it a lot with straight truck fleets, right? Or smaller equipment fleets.
Yes.
Because they have a vehicle that might not be regulated until it's loaded, and then it pops over the weight limit, and all of a sudden you've got a driver that's not properly classed, for the equipment they're hauling. So, and I'm guessing that's a final mile challenge too, which I think is one of the things that True North and Hall is kind of coming together to try to solve. So,
to put a bow on this, I would tell you that, in my opinion, that that license not being updated properly does not make that driver him or her a safer, a better, or worse driver, right? It's just an admin function. And so when I see systems like the ones Tim has created, I'm like, that helps everybody, right? The underwriters, it goes away, so we can take it's a better risk, or the risk is properly presented to them. And it helps the motor carrier get out of that, because driver fitness, as we all know, once you're in fitness, it's a tough one to get out of.
Oh, it is. Well, and I think if you look at the kind of the research that's been done on the basics, you'll see that the driver fitness basic is actually inversely proportional to crash risk in many respects, because it's versus the others that are more correlating with crash risk, like unsafe driving and those types of things. But I think from an administrative perspective, that's why I think back to your point, Bill, is you got to have a meshing of the human and the technology. And I think you need to be intentional about it, right? You just don't say, okay, I'm going to plop this widget in here and over here. And so maybe, Tim, maybe you can talk a little bit about how you approach it, that meshing of technology and compliance.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And my co-founder Tuan and I are very pragmatic builders. I think the one thing I'll stress is that you all on this call are domain expertise, and there's no software out there will replace the knowledge and wisdom that you guys have, right? So, we have to understand that with good software,
God willing, anyway, we like our jobs.
Tim, we are hoping that ChatGTP will replace Sean very soon. I've been waiting for that for years.
Does that mean I'm going to be the last man standing, Bert, or what?
You're my favorite, Steve.
Oh man, can't win with Bert.
The reason why I say that is because I think a lot of people put a lot of weight into software automation, and again, my co-founder and I came from one of the largest brands that has been really focused on this during our days at Uber, and so we understand what the limitations of automation and software, at least what it relates to passenger transportation and freight movements, can do. And the reason why I mention that is that there's a lot of things that software can really solve today, Steve. And I think a lot of that is just unifying a lot of systems in one place and cleaning the data, this is like 101, but at the end of the day, there's still the past 5, and maybe you guys agree, but 5 years in trucking has brought in so much more data around a fleet than I think we've ever had before. Everything from camera, truck, tire pressure. There's just so much out there. But now what people don't see on the flip side of that is that each one of those new business applications you brought on, you need to have a new hire, more headcount. So a lot of teams I walk into literally are jumping between the ELD provider over here, the camera provider over here, and they're really toggling between many different systems. And they're just struggling just to make sure, kind of seeing false positives, false negatives. Was that actual safety event? Yes or no? That's where we're at right now. And I don't think people really appreciate how that's created a lot of problem. And I think a lot of people are actually numbing out to a lot of information coming off these trucks, to the point where I think people aren't realizing the unsafe behavior that's actually occurring, but they're just numbing out, just similar to emails, right? How many emails are we sitting on right now? Because it's just too much noise. So the reason why I say that is that I think what Hall is really, and again, there's others, but what Hall is really trying to perfect is unifying these systems in one place and really understanding the profile of a driver, the profile around a piece of equipment, the overall holistic view of a fleet. Like, just seeing, based on all these systems I have plugged in, how am I doing from a compliant side? How am I doing from a safety? What's my overall risk profile? Like, that is a challenge of itself to orchestrate the noise. So, and again, I like to, just to be very clear where we're at in this industry around technology, because it's some amazing data we've never had access to before. But also there is this dark side of it of, like, unless we really start sanitizing, cleaning, and really cleaning up the experience for the user, it's all noise. And there's not going to be any benefit. It's actually more of a liability, because now we know things are happening. It's in our 4 walls, but we didn't do anything about it. And that's a plaintiff attorney's dream. So that, again,
I like that statement, orchestrate the noise. I might have to steal that one.
Go ahead,
you're right. Yeah. A lot of people are struggling with that data, understanding what do I need, what's a nice to have, and how do I manage all of this, and the whole disparate system issue. You're exactly right. They've built things for certain purposes, and now they don't talk to each other, and it creates more work internally to deal with it.
So I conceptually, I see what you're saying here. I'm curious, you're gathering data from pretty disparate systems and functions, right? And lots of great trucking companies have grown up over the years, creating great systems to deal with specific problems. I've got my drug and alcohol team over here. I've got my recruiting and hiring over here. I've got my hours of service, compliance, safety training over here. And a lot of these folks, Steve and I have been in these companies, they don't want to give up their domain, right? It's how they've built all of their value, right? So what do you say to a team that's like, why do I have to change? Like, I've got experts in all my spaces. I've crossed my T's and dot my I's. Why do I even want to bring it under one roof, right? Like,
Yeah.
What would you say to a fleet?
I think that we have to realize what fleets we're talking about, because I really do fundamentally think a fleet of 1,000 power units is different than the 5 to 1,000 to 5. So for someone who actually has those teams, Sean, I sell them best in class piece of my software. Hey, for your hours of service team, hey, I can probably get them back a couple hours a day because my software can audit these hours. Hey, for collecting and validating documents, hey, use this part of my software. So that's a solution sell. I'm not selling them the platform, but quite frankly, if you have those teams, you're a big fleet. Majority of trucking companies out there do not have those individual teams. It's the Sharons. It's a one-person shop that is supposed to do all those functions, because at the same level as some of the largest fleets in our country, because she doesn't have a pass, she has to maintain the same regulatory compliance as her peers who have the resources, a much bigger team. So that's where Hall, as a platform of choice that can really help automate these tasks across these individual areas, really comes alive. From like, hey, here's the platform, plug and play, versus, hey, you just want to really modernize this part of your regulatory compliance team. Here you go. Here's this. So again, I try to be very, because those two fleets are very different. They're very different businesses, and they have very different. This one right now is trying to survive, to be quite honest, right? Like, the freight market, it is what it is. They're not gonna post any new hires, where this company is really saying, hey, how can I save? How can I save a little bit? How can I get my team some extra hours? How can I repurpose them to really go call on new business, right? It's all about, really trying to save headcount at this point. So that, again,
it's something I've seen too, Tim. And since 2010, right, Sean, Steve, I saw this move with motor carriers. Not everyone, but the industry moved. We're going back to the first podcast, Sean. Moved to compliance, and at times safety got forgotten, right? So if I can offload the compliance piece, and I can take, as Tim mentioned, save some hours and focus on training and culture and education and hand-holding, that's better time. It's a better return. Bill's always taught me that since the time I've been here is, if I can focus on culture, that's better time served for my company.
Well, so I think picking up on that, and Bart and Bill, maybe, so where do you see, these different compliance areas, where do you see as the biggest, where fleets struggle the most? What areas do you what are your top 3 areas where you think they're being challenged?
Well, let me start Bert, I can maybe take a first run at this, because I wanted to kind of continue the line of thinking here around these different teams at the larger carrier level and then the smaller midsize level. One thing we talk about a lot internally at True North is there's a global discussion about driver shortage. And whether that's, you think that's true or not, at the end of the day, that's been a discussion for 20 years. What no one talks about, and Bert, I think you mentioned it earlier, is we believe there's also a level of quality and or experience leaving the industry in the areas of compliance, safety and loss prevention, maintenance, some of these core issues that ultimately affect a motor carrier's risk profile. And so, regardless of industry size, again, if you can pair up a technology that gives a pretty straightforward workflow, it allows organizations like True North, Steve, Sean, what you guys do, to help coach, develop these people that are inside the organization managing some of these functions, right? And you can really get to that level that they need to understand compliance and safety and loss prevention at a level that we're losing, I think, and no one's talking about. And so that's a piece of it. But then you start to kind of separate the industry and some of the problems, and you look at these large organizations, and to Tim's point, like most of them, for organizational reasons, for job description reasons, they organize themselves in inherent silos. And, that gets into the change management aspect of any technology adoption. And it's why it's important for, as the risk guys, to start to connect the dots with these organizations to say, here's why we have to break silos down. Here's why we have to leverage common platforms and a more cohesive look at a risk profile and manage that data more effectively. It's because at the end of the day, it affects your top 3 largest costs in your P&L, which is the insurance, right? And I don't think when you build an organization in silos, you start to lose the connectivity to that particular function's role in managing expenses. And it's a very relevant conversation today because freight rates are down and everybody's focused on expense management. And every company's looking to, get what they can out of their insurance program or cut costs in areas. But nobody's talking about how to more effectively manage total cost of risk. And some of that just inherently is bringing augmentation of technology to get more productivity out of the workforce. And that's where you have to go, we believe, to more effectively manage risk over time. On the smaller company side, go ahead, Bert.
No, I think, Bill, I was leading you right there. I wanted to get to our conversation about how that looks different in different size organizations, right? Assessing that risk, putting that, additional padding on the bottom line, focusing on the P&L. What does that look like with 1 to 5, medium size, larger fleets? How is that different?
Arguably it's more impactful. And Peter, maybe weigh in on the smaller mid-sized carrier base too, because I think this is relevant in the final mile space. But you have a lot of exposure to our kind of global client base. But again, back to compliance as a core function. This is about staying in business. There's an immediate business threat if you don't manage compliance, period. But the implications of being on the line from an insurability standpoint aren't the, 10%, 20% rate increases that the larger fleets might be seeing as they're controlling their larger premium base and or loss cost. But we're talking about 50, 100 plus % cost implications on their premium per unit if managed ineffectively. And so, you quickly as a small carrier get out of business viability, not just from not managing, not paying attention or mismanaging compliance, but the implications on, that annual insurance renewal as well. Peter, I don't know, your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, that's going to be true, not just specific to final mile carriers. I mean, if you take a step back and maybe contextualize a little bit further, when someone goes out and gets authority, human nature kind of innately says, I don't intend or plan to stay at one truck, right? We all desire to grow. We all desire to scale. And so back to how do you create a bridge with technology that allows the culture that makes all these individual companies unique and the process to be true and kind of harmonize? What we're seeing in the smaller carrier spaces, they need a way to create repeatable, scalable process to help align with that growth aspiration. So to get from 1 to 5, to get from 5 to 10, to get from 10 to 50, and so on and so forth, they need something that allows them to manage compliance without throwing a bunch of extra bodies. So, I can hire Hall and Tim and grab 85% of the platform versus the 1,000 unit motor carrier that may only need 5% of the platform to still find a return on investment, but they leverage it differently. Because the output or the result is, if they're not doing those things, to Bill's point, you quickly fail a new entrant audit, or you quickly become either uninsurable or uninsurable due to cost because you can no longer afford insurance. And I think what's also happening, the epiphany that we're having, and the reason we're having this podcast around technology and data, the underwriting community has woken up to the same thought process and logic on the insurance side of things, right? They want that information just like True North wants that information, just like Hall wants it, DOT, FMCSA wants that information. So they're getting smarter and rewiring their underwriting models to not only incentivize the sharing and use of that information, but they actually want to rate on that information. There's some insurance carriers that are on the leading edge of offering, at least maybe securing the rates that they have today, and not assessing that 50 to 100% rate increase that Bill's talking about, or they're incentivizing the share that data can offer with more real-time performance-based insurance discounts as the policy goes on month to month, not just year to year. So you see an alignment of what's happening in logistics is happening in other sectors of our economy, and those are starting to intersect pretty beautifully.
So it's interesting train of conversation. I think most fleets, I think we've talked about operating silos. So their compliance team is here, but their risk management team is here. And I think this kind of crosswalking from compliance to loss prevention to risk is something that I think is really illuminating, that a lot of folks really aren't thinking about and connecting those dots. And I think to Tim's, to your point, where technology can play a role in helping provide information and context to that. And so when we talk about risk, maybe Bill, anybody, but the compliance folks always are looking at it from, okay, it's somewhat binary, but ultimately we're looking at preventing crashes. But are there other risks that, as carriers think about their compliance programs, are there other risks that they should be thinking about in context so they understand how important their compliance responsibilities are? It's not just a check the box exercise, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the framework, and Steve, you went there, that we use through a carrier's, life cycle and maturation, when we think about the risk side and then the insurance side, is the progression from, buying insurance, managing compliance, to progressing to taking on some level of risk, a deductible, a self-insured retention, and then more focus on loss prevention. And then ultimately, the epitome of large organizations is about managing risk and financing risk in much more sophisticated structures like captives, et cetera. And so there's a thread there. And, we walk into organizations a lot of times where those two kind of runs are out of lockstep with each other. There might be a more sophisticated risk financing structure, but the risk management strategy hasn't kept up. Or I'm very compliance focused, but now I'm taking on some level of retention or deductible, and my team doesn't understand the implications of that from a cost perspective if we have too many accidents. So the goal for us is to help organizations stay in lockstep, because the best way to drive down cost in and around risk and insurance is obviously controlling your future and taking on more sophisticated structures as you go over time. Like that's the punchline for us. That's how, and the numbers say it. Atri has it, like the larger the organization, the less they pay for insurance. And so we want to help organizations kind of on that stream, particularly if you're growth oriented. But that requires ultimately these silos to be working, in less silos and information, free flowing in the organization. And ultimately everybody understands their contribution to the overall risk profile. That's a big discussion for us. Early days in the smaller motor carrier base, and then as they graduate into the larger, more sophisticated, more complex organizations.
Yeah, I'll just add to that, like just from a tactical, like why software is such a good medium to implement compliance management is, we've been talking a lot about regulatory compliance, but there's insurance compliance, right? When the True North team goes out and advocates for one of their clients, they really help structure this overall risk program. But a lot of times the people on the ground they weren't in the room negotiating with these insurance carriers, with True North, and they don't know what's required. Like they're not looking at the COI and saying, okay, that's the age of equipment I'm supposed to have in this, or this is the type of driver. So what we're able to do is is embed the insurance requirements in real time. So when they're adding a driver to the system, we can notify the user right then and there. Tim Henry does not qualify based on your insurance requirements. So again, I think it's just a funny example, but really going beyond just regulatory.
Is it funny because it's true, or?
I shouldn't be behind the wheel, but those are the tactical things. That's like embedding insurance requirement at the operational level. That yes, and that's the tactical way of closing down silos, of allowing software to share these rules across different teams so that everyone's following the same script. Right. That's just a very tangible, tactical thing to embed insurance requirements.
Tim, you speak of it as that's kind of a small example, but I can tell you, back to Steve's earlier quote, 9 out of 10 of the examples I get where there's a driver used that shouldn't have been used because of some licensing issue, the compliance department within that motor carrier knew it, and somehow the operations people never got the message and the driver was dispatched. That happens every day. It's happening today. And these systems don't seem to communicate. And that in itself, I don't know, would cut that number in half, Steve, would make a great impact on it.
Oh, for sure. I mean, we mentioned ATRI a little bit ago, but they've got a lot of great research that ties those driver behavior performance violations to future crash propensity. And there's absolutely ways to do it. And I think, picking up on that, I think some of the things we talked about, the technology platform can empower those smaller fleets, right? So they can use it, and certainly on a final mile where we've got those smaller carriers that really are doing multiple things at the same time, right? And so that platform can empower, and maybe Tim and Peter, if you guys want to maybe talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, maybe Peter, you can share a little bit about kind of maybe the final mile side. I've done a lot of talking.
Yeah, I think we to riff a little bit with you. Obviously, a life's work and passion in final mile, and really just we talked about growth industries. One that now makes up 15% of our economy in terms of online purchases. And what's even more intriguing to me is the fact that when you think about the cost of the entire supply chain, once it leaves the manufacturer, the final mile piece represents like over 40% of the total expense. So you're literally taking, ships and containers and planes and trains to get something from point A to point B. But that last 10 miles or 20 miles or 50 miles is 40% of the cost. And so I think what we're really excited about with the partnership with Hall is there's a lot of investment going into final mile because of the growth and because of the current cost structure, and ways to help our clients either at a 3PL, think courier, think final mile white glove, think Amazon, FedEx, DSPs, ISPs. Those folks start to think a little bit differently about not just their own lifeblood and capacity, but then if they do use a settlement carrier, contract carrier, broker carrier model, then there's elements of that underlying risk profile that they need to be held accountable as well from a brokerage perspective. So the application, because again, while Hall is built on a FMCSA DOT compliance for a single truck and a single driver, the accessibility, or at least the permission-based verification and validation process from a compliance standpoint for brokered liability, so think negligent entrustment, negligent selection, hiring, those risks are becoming equally part of not just final mile, but all of transportation logistics as well. And so the ability to have individuals on the platform that then aggregate up and allow everybody to use information that pertains to their scope. So, permission-based, swim lane focused opportunities to say, hey, this driver file or this driver's license, is inactive for whatever reason. Who needs to take action about that? Who cares about that information? And let that information work through the system. And so, again, one of the reasons why we're excited about Hall is it's not a rip and replace. And so, the systems that have been built, whether that's a dispatch system, whether that's a settlement management system, financial TMS, all those different operational systems that exist, Hall isn't trying to be all things to all people and rip and replace that system. It's how do you take the meaningful parts of information from each, aggregate them, interpret them, and then allow kind of actionable data at various levels, whether that be, again, the insurance carrier, whether that be the FMCSA DOT, whether that be the insured and the capacity that we're all relying upon, or the logistics broker from a compliance standpoint.
Yeah, and I think, speaking on behalf of Hall, we always knew that compliance, our whole mission is unifying compliance, safety, or risk, right? And we knew that risk aspect of that mission really pertains to insurance. At the end of the day, that is, if we do our job right, our clients can really go out there and receive the coverage that best fits their profile. And we've always thought that, but we're not an insurance company. Like, that's just, and we're excited about this collaboration is because this puts us right then and there with some of the earliest carriers coming into entering the market and really trying to get them the A to Z playbook to be a quality carrier. And it really pushes the form factor of our platform, which is exciting. We've always worked with some of the largest motor carriers in the country, but over the past year, we've been really focused on what if that fleet was only 5? Like, how can Hall really help this use case? Because quite frankly, that's the majority of U.S. trucking, right? So again, it was both a fantastic opportunity, but really from a product developer and really thinking about if we're really trying to keep the road safer, this is the demographic, this is the majority of trucking, and it's really pushing the Hall team to think about that driver, that's also the owner, that's also the dispatcher. How can we help him and they or them to really maintain their compliance and maintenance of their fleet? And how do we help them? How does Hall really start the origin of their journey of becoming a motor carrier and growing? Right. That's kind of the overall reasons why we're really excited with the collaboration. Kind of why it's pushing us in this really exciting direction.
So what specifically we're talking about sort of big concepts and driving compliance and all of. What specifically are we accomplishing with the partnership? How should carriers think about True North and Hall coming together? What does it do for them? What are the X's and the O's?
Sean, I think I can take a stab at that one, but so we'll use Final Mile as our initial kind of launched use case. But to Peter's point, we have 2 customers really in that environment. We have a 3PL, and then we have these ultimately these contract carriers or these small motor carriers, typically 1 to 5 units. And so use case out of the box there was a single platform that creates a complete profile view of the potentially hundreds of motor carriers that are delivering furniture, installing washer, dryer, etc. in people's homes. There's certain levels of criteria that these 3PLs are reviewing, right? And like we talked about, most of that information today lives in disparate systems. For us, though, core and fundamentally, we want to build a stronger insured that's more sustainable. And we get asked from all sizes of motor carriers, really, for Bert and John Biblis, who's been on the podcast, and some of our safety loss control people, can you either help us with, or even in some cases take over safety and compliance? You guys do a great job of being an extension of our team and the risk solutions group, you're built around a fractional, labor model in many ways. Could you take this over? And the answer is like, that's pretty tough to scale when you're just building it around humans. But again, when you augment it with technology, okay, now there might be a way for us to actually impact our clients at that grassroots compliance level. And so in the final mile space, you've got these, we've got hundreds of motor carrier insureds that, are mostly owners and operators. And compliance is a very secondary, necessary evil, but there's not a lot of focus happening at these individual company levels that we are now building a process around the technology and some outsourced safety and compliance functionality to deliver that as what we call a safety in a box, safety manager in a box play for our insureds. And ultimately, if we can help an organization, small or large, play a role there, we can build a more sustainable insured, which helps us, as an organization do what we do and generate revenue how we generate revenue. But ultimately, our 3PL clients, now they can create more certainty in their capacity base to say, I know these contract carriers have a higher probability of staying in business and can be part of my capacity pool longer term. So that's kind of use case one. What we've accidentally found out is even in this mid-market space, there's a lot of, and we work with a lot of industry verticals, right? So yes, truckload, intermodal, LTL, final mile. We're even doing quite a bit in the construction space in a micro niche that is called the Storm Chaser Group. So organizations that might have 20 static trucks but flex up to 100 and go down to a post-Katrina event and help with the cleanup activity. DOT compliance is a major issue for that sector, as an example. And so they need a platform and potentially some outsourced resource in those verticals too. So there's a lot of kind of emerging opportunities for organization leaders to say, love the platform. Could I outsource the function entirely to you all in a fractional way? And so those are things that are kind of bubbling.
Bill,
up.
Go ahead, Bert. Bill, I would offer on that the non-trucking truckers, right? Whether it be construction, whatever it is, general contractors wind up in this space a lot. When they get caught in this probably, when they get a violation and they get a fine, they have no idea what to do. So systems like this just keep them out of trouble, if you will, keeps them in compliance because, DOT walks in on them. They've literally just ramped up for a specific job and they don't fully understand what they're involved in. These types of systems to me help them more than most. Imperative that they have.
If you look at the data, you guys are targeting in this conversation right segments. If you look at particularly the last couple of years, we've had a huge influx of new motor carriers. 95% of them are one truck operators. But if you look at, for example, the new entrant program as an example, and you look at their crash performance, those carriers that go through a new entrant safety audit are actually increasing their crashes after the audit. So that it's not helping them. They're getting in more crashes. And if you look at the crash data, the largest group of carriers from a weight perspective, where their crashes are increasing, the rate is the 10 to 14,000 pound vehicles. So you've got those sectors that are screaming for help, and they may not even know it, right? And so that's what you guys are talking about here can certainly help those smaller companies that are just getting into the business that may not think they're a trucking company, to really help them to really manage their compliance program to ultimately mitigate their risk.
So, I think that's all perfect and brilliant. I'm thinking about the smaller carrier though, and I'm even thinking about this program and how involved a 3PL or an insurance carrier even wants to be in the nuts and bolts of the compliance program of those small carriers, right? That's a big task. it comes with a bunch of risk. The lawyers would probably tell you not to do it. So then I think one thing that's interesting there is like enter AI, right? Because Bert said it perfect. These small truckers, they're worried about trucking, right? They're worried about their fuel bill and when they're going to get paid and what's happening at home. They're not worried about compliance. And as much as a 3PL or an insurance might be like, hey, you should think about this, it's tough for them to do that. So I'm interested, and I think we need to have a whole podcast on this. But tell me, Steve's laughing because I say this all the time. Tim, tell me how AI solves all our problems, please.
Well, I can't say it'll solve all the problems. I think we're in kind of this land of AI eating away at everything. But what I will say is that the cost of leveraging, I think a lot of people are hearing about, LLMs, long language models, and the cost of leveraging them within software has just dramatically come down, whether it's being subsidized by VC money. That's a whole nother story. But we have never had access to such computational technology. So that part is exciting as a technologist. I don't need to have a team of 25 data scientists to help me to have the same compute of just a model off the shelf. Why it's exciting? Because we can start testing. Like we can actually start putting a lot of these new LLM models into the real world to see how they really work well. And where I think the most value of around these new LLM models is really taking a lot of this data that are within the fleets. As Steve I mentioned earlier, orchestrating the noise. How can we start looking at all these pieces of data coming off of the truck around the driver and really making sense of it? And again, bringing that to actual product. Hall's whole goal is to create a safety manager in a box. Our whole, as we further build our maintenance modules around equipment, how do we create the maintenance manager in a box? Because Sean, bring it full circle, is like these smaller carriers are really just trying to survive the day to day. But that's just a personality, right? I get it. Like I run a company, I understand that mindset of what do I have to tackle today? But unfortunately, as a business owner, you still have to think long term and understand what may get ahead of me in 2 to 3 months. That's computation, right? That's thinking, that's bandwidth. What software is really good is doing that for you. Hey, Tim, just to let you know, these 3 pieces of equipment are due up for the annual inspection. Let's take note. Those recommendations and bubbling up tasks, like that's a really easy way of having almost an AI assistant within the software. So that's where I think a lot of the AI is good, is augmenting a lot of things I don't want to think about, right? There's a lot, so I think those are the tactical applications that we're really trying to bring to our users of, hey, you may want to look at Sean. He's had a few safety events. We recommend you assign this video to him. That's a logical thought tree that the system is recommending for you. Doesn't mean you have to do it, but we're teeing up the hard work, and you decide as the user, yeah, that's probably right. I would have recommended that video to Sean because of that driving behavior, the hard cornering. So those are the tasks that I think these new AI models, we can really leverage and orchestrate a lot of the noise within a fleet. So you really have a very clear picture. What do I need to do today to make sure I'm compliant, safe, and managing my risk program? And that's what, I always try to anchor it into like tactical. How does this save me time? And that saves time at the end of the day.
I think that's great, Tim, for sharing that, because I think we're a very practical industry, right? So AI is not going to take over the world, but there are some things that can assist us along the way. And I think that's really one of the things. And Bert will get us on. He always wants to provide those practical tips as part of this program. And I think that's very helpful insight.
So is AI automation then?
It is a form of automation, in my opinion. It's intelligent automation, right? It has contextual understanding. It really understands kind of what's happening within. And again, I'm essentially.
Tim, you used something earlier too that I really like, Steve, like the orchestration of the data. I like you clean the data too, right? The fat fingering goes away when we start to use technology, whether that's AI or.
Yeah. And again, software vendors like Hall are really now the cost point of a lot of these very advanced, even a computer vision model. Like now, being able to have a camera that can actually parse, understand that is a license, understand that medical card, and then have logic behind to say, hey, if that's a medical card, you need this bits of information, and then you need to take that, and so that again, a lot of these really advanced technology now is coming down to a price point that can be leveraged by the masses. And that's the exciting part, because now we're leveraging this to really solve tactical and pragmatic problems. Because before, the problem had to be so great to justify the expenditure of that type of tech. Now that's not the case. The cost barrier has gone down, and now we can actually have it take care of things that, we just didn't have the opportunity before.
Awesome. Well, don't get too good at it, Tim. You'll take my job away, and maybe Steve's too. But we appreciate folks working on tough problems, and it's a huge industry, and everybody needs a little bit of help. So
Everyone does.
I think that's really great. I think we've come about to the end of our time today. I wanted to, of course, thank everybody for being on here, and also offer everybody an opportunity for your final quick take on compliance, safety, final mile, on AI, on Bert's hairdo today, which is, as always, perfect. Whatever you'd like to say. But from me to you all and to our listeners, thank you very much.
Nothing.
I'd just like to comment on my hair one more time, Sean. It takes a while, but this is Grecian formula.
Perfect.
Red. Thank you.
Red dye number 7. All right.
Thanks, guys. This was a lot of fun. Tim, thanks for joining us today. And, I'd say for listeners out there, I think the team that you've got on the line right now, between the high level strategic consulting to the, tactical, how to do it at the grassroots day to day, True North, Scopelitis, Consulting, Hall, these are organizations that are committed to the transportation industry. And I enjoy working with all of you in each of your kind of roles, responsibilities. And if you need help out there, please reach out to us. We're here as industry advocates and trying to help build organizations more effectively in a better way. So appreciate Sean, Steve, both you guys for what you do on this podcast too.
You bet. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Bill, and we appreciate the support. And I think the one thing I'll leave folks with is compliance is not a set it and forget it thing. It's an iterative process, and now it's much more with you've got technology platforms that it's not talk to people, get educated, demystify things, and companies like Tim's and Hall, they're really there. They're not just selling you a product. They're helping you improve your business. So take the time to invest in that, in talking with those people and get smart about how they can help you.
All right. Well, thanks, everybody. Appreciate you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of True North Truck Thought. If you enjoyed the topic today and want to tune in for future conversations here on the TTT Pod, make sure to follow us. Also, please don't hesitate to let us know which topics you want us to cover in future episodes. Drop us a line in the comments section or send us an email to transportationnews@truenorthcompanies.com. Thanks and have a safe day.